Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series of the experiences of disciples, devotees, Aurovilians. And today, again, we are honored to have Bems with us. Namaste, Bems. I wanted to ask you first about the psychic being, which Mother and Sri Aurobindo have told us is the key to transformation, to bringing it out of these veils that have hidden us from the divine for so many centuries, so many births. Can you tell us a little of your experiences and your students?
Psychic being is not something that I speak about very often, because I'm in a university environment. But one thing I do that is really interesting for me, I'm a professor, but I teach unknowns. I'm a professor, but I teach ignorance. One of the things that I do is to open people up to the possibility of not knowing as a way into their psychic being. Because we know so much, or so we think, and yet that knowledge is just a drop in the ocean. It's not the ocean. The only way you can help people understand that is by using the language of the university and the sort of Western rhetoric to help people understand. One of the ways I use it is help students understand this, is I introduce them to the curriculum of medical ignorance by a woman called Anne Kerwin. Her work deeply touched me because she created a taxonomy of unknowing, how we don't know, a taxonomy of ignorance, if you like. And she used it for medical students because doctors have to be 100% reliable, know the science in order to heal you. Otherwise, you're going to be absolutely worried about putting your body and faith in their hands. So they have to come across knowledgeable. She created this curriculum that would help doctors manage their ignorance, because their knowledge as well is just a drop in the ocean. Consciousness, all the things we don't know about the body. How do we manage our ignorance in a professional setting? That was her agenda. And the universities are all about professional settings, preparing people for the world of work and service. So she created this taxonomy where there were unknown unknowns. Let's start with first known unknowns. Known unknowns are things in discovery that with Parkinson's disease, presumably, we know A, but we don't know B. We still need to discover B. That's what a known unknown is. Then there were unknown unknowns, which is the deep self. This is the psychic being that you're talking about. The unknown unknown. How can we know what we do not know? I mean, there are ways into it. So the other way that in part of this taxonomy is the known unknown. All the things that we know but we don't, tacit knowledge, intuitive knowledge, the knowledge that we don't give credit for, or we don't want to say, this is how I'm knowing, because I'm not allowed to say it's my instinct. I'm not allowed to say it's my psychic being. I'm not allowed to say that I've got message and it's so we say it's a known unknown. We know it is known. It's not the unknown unknown. Unknown unknown is the deep discovery that we're on, that we are all revealing, like revealing a big story in a big way around transition and not knowing what the transition is that we're going into, but also revealing ourselves in how we engage with that. And one of the ways that is very easy to engage the unknown unknown is through a creative practice. So for me, it's communication. For me, it's writing, it's storytelling, it's engaging very intuitively in this practice that is, like I say, channeling, being a secretary for the imagination, for whatever energy is coming through, whatever you're channeling. There's that psychic being that is allowed to have a voice. One of the things I love about writing, and I teach all my students, is that writing allows you to say the unspeakable. A lot of the things that people don't say in every day. So I'm not really interested in common knowledge or common sense. I'm much more interested in uncommon sense. And I think it's a big journey of trust, and it's a big journey of attunement. So teaching my students attunement is something that I was telling you about we did in the garden today, in the beautiful gardens around Matramanda that you're looking after, the whole idea of attunement. So I use theory, because theory is a very good way into the expectations of the academy in a field as big as psychic being and a different way of knowing. So using theory, like Maxine Green's theory, walking around the gardens. Maxine Green, who's a very well-known transformative educationist, passed now in New York, has an institute, Maxine Green Institute. She said that, so I was trying to teach them about attunement. So I used her theory, which is around aesthetics. And beauty is so important in Oroville. It's so important in the ideals of the mother. So beauty, aesthetics. Maxine Green said the opposite was anesthetics. So how do you not kill off your senses? How do you enliven them? How do you attune to what's happening in the space around you through silence and connect with each other in silence? All of that is work on what might be described as psychic being, but without describing it always as such. I'm quite out of the closet now, by the way. I tell people I'm interested in spiritual innovation. That's my only interest. I run a degree in innovation, but I'm not so interested in technological innovation. I mean, I see that as part of it all, if it can be useful, but not technological triumphalism. I think it has to start with the inner work. So there's other people doing this kind of beautiful work in the world, and that to refer to, like, inner development goals that are now matching the United Nations development goals, and work that is being adopted from other universities all around the world. So it's a growing movement. It's a transformation movement that more people are aware of because they can see there's a need. So one of the things is there's a story of self, there's a story of us, and there's the story of now. That's a framework Marshall Gans uses. When I do work on the story of self with students, that's work that allows them to tap into that transformative knowing, being. The story of us is an expansion of that. That's the unity project. How do you connect with others as well as yourself? I use the image of a two-way telescope, way of looking out into the world and the way of looking at self as a research paradigm, which creates all kinds of beautiful results, because research in a university is often, I've got to be the objective person who knows nothing. It's not about me, it's about them. Well, actually, when you're doing transformative work, and I'm involved with this group called Action Research for Transformation, you can't exclude the self. We know that the self is part of it and has to be transformed too. So that kind of research, understanding being, and then connecting that being to self and others, and then once connecting with others, the action that can come out of that, the impact you can have. So I'm really interested in impact of the transformation. I don't think it's, and that's through service, that's through seva, that's also through thinking big. And one thing is thinking bold. Mother had a bold vision.
Oh, yes.
It was awesome. She had a bigger vision than most people have.
She was so far ahead of all of us.
She was so far ahead. But why aren't people taught to think big? So one of the things that I do with my staff and my teams is we've transformed this idea of a safe space for learning, which is quite conventional. And we're going to the post-conventional way of thinking about these spaces for learning. And we called them bold spaces, brave spaces, not just safe spaces. So how can you create a brave space? Well, we do it in spades, and by the time our students graduate, they're like so ready. I've done a little study on this, and the thing that moves them the most and challenges them the most, I guess, that they're most concerned about is how quickly can I change the world? That's how they graduate. So the impact is really important, not just the inner work. How do you express the story of self in the story of us, and then the story of now? Because we are living in a time of eco-social crisis. The whole world is in a crisis.
I would like to talk a little bit more about that, if you would, because
Yes.
we are seeing today, seemingly, a great force of evil and darkness attempting to englobe the earth, and yet all is the divine.
That's a concept and a half, right? To get your head around, and to wait and understand what's going to happen, and to be part of an emerging story is the important bit for me as an educator, not to stand back from it and wait for things to happen. To be part of a story, but to be part not of a little story, but of the bigger story, the better story. There is a dry, useless reality, as Jan Martel, who wrote Life of Pi, wrote about the dry, useless reality, the kind of bill-paying reality of life. But there is a much more cosmic reality of the spectacular real, the extraordinary real that's possible. Living those possibilities is what's most important right now. And what's really important, at least in the work I do and what I feel I can contribute, is creating a sense of agency that is appropriate for our times, because these times demand a lot from people. If you're living through these times, you have to commit to your responsibility to act as well. It's very, Bhagavad Gita, sort of battle of Kurukshetra times.
Mother said to us, no words, acts.
Yes. Yes, so that's one of the, we run a change makers program, and lots of people make changes, making the change on an inner level, but also making a change in the outside world. Having hundreds of students coming out of a system to make that change, I think that's the most important thing that education can do now, because the work of transformation in the world out there starts through learning, but not just learning the facts and the figures, but learning how to transform, how to play your part in it, understanding the thinking different is that's something we teach our students. We run a whole session on think different from the first school onwards that we do with our students. You need to make the creative leap into a different era. So we actually assess students on making that creative leap. How far can they push their ideas? So we get students, we show them all the cutting edge ideas that are happening in the world in their first assessment in our program. And then we say, okay, now curate your own 5 ideas, 3 ideas, and do a what if scenario, ask a beautiful question of each of those ideas, and then take that question for a walk by asking, doing a what if scenario, a speculative research proposal, or a thought experiment on your idea. So we want to see people make a leap. What's needed now is for people to make a leap out of the ordinary ways of thinking into extraordinary, more liberated ways of thinking in order to have the impact that's required for our times. Because small thinking the way we've always thought, being the way we've always thought, is being the way we've always been in the world, is not good enough anymore. It's what got us into this stuckness. Sri Aurobindo talked about the complexity of the world. We do a lot of work in complexity, complex thinking, complex challenges. How do we supersede the complexity that is there? How do we understand it so that we can grapple with the complexity of our challenges that we have now?
Do the students understand that they can only make a change in the world when they change themselves?
Well, that is an important part to understand, isn't it? And that's what the whole curriculum for being is about.
Yes.
Changing themselves, the curriculum for being, which is the idea behind the course that I've run at the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation.
And yet you're working within a university and a system.
Yes.
That
But then why don't we all work within the systems that we're in? I mean, I think that it's all very well saying, I work within a system. True, I certainly is a system. But the ashram is a system. Oracle is a system. We all work within systems. And understanding the impact you can have in a system, understanding the complexity of that system, understanding the fractions and the challenges within that system, and understanding the incredible possibilities, the nudges you can have, the impact you can have, understanding. So there's one theory we use, which comes from adaptive leadership, which is a beautiful theory for here, I guess, which is the idea of being on the balcony and on the dance floor at the same time, being able to have a witness self and a participant in a system at the same time. So this is a concept that we teach our students.
Wonderful.
How do we actually participate in the world and observe it too? How do we become more conscious in what we're learning? We teach these skills around consciousness of learning. Because it's, you kids come back from school and you go, what did you learn today? And you go, nothing. And so that's the general answer, right? So how do you make people more aware of what they're learning? How do you get them to have a register of their aha moments? We talked earlier on about recording transformation and whether or not it is measurable. How do you get people to self-monitor through that witness self?
The witness self, looking at oneself.
Yeah. That's a really important one to grow for people.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about silencing the mind?
Silencing the mind is the most blissful practice. And it's something that I've done for 32 years, and I spend a long time every day, about an hour meditating. While I'm in Oracle, I go to Matra Mandir every day, to petals, and it's an important way to integrate absolutely everything, because that work gets done, the surrender gets done, and every piece of the cellular being is enlivened during that process. So silencing the mind is also about the body, and it's about receptivity, and it's also about creativity, it's about unity. All of those things that we aspire to here in Oracle, certainly, are achievable through that. And learning, it's the best way to learn that consciousness-based education. It's the best way to learn. Filling someone's head up with facts is not the same as transforming someone. The old adage of, it's not about filling a bucket, but lighting a fire, education.
Have you had the opportunity to read The Mind of the Cells?
I haven't, no. But
it's quite a book. It's Satprem and mothers speaking to Satprem on her work of finding a mind in the cells themselves and working on transforming those cells, those cells, which she said that anyone in the world who was open, once she transformed her cells, would immediately get that transformation.
Nice.
And we are seeing now, even in botany and horticulture, how these trees communicate with each other.
Oh, they do.
And I know the story of a tree that was 50 miles away from another group of trees in a soil condition and in a environmental condition where it couldn't survive. And the scientists went down and dug in the ground, and they saw that there was a whole system of fungus that this group of trees was supplying to keep that tree alive.
So that's the unseen world. That's the unity consciousness in nature. So one thing that I like to do, I think I mentioned to you, the Beyond Human Unity project. How do we connect? I think in a time, you said, how do we deal with this time of eco-social crisis? The self, the silence, all good. But also, how do you connect with the non-human world? Becomes such an important mission. So the Human Unity Project, we connect with our collective, we connect with the bigger Oroville community in the studio that we run, the Oroville Global Studio. But then connecting with the non-human world is also one of the transformative markers that we've seen on this studio. Our students all get it, they all mention, they all talk about the nature, the beauty, the place, and the impact of them on the experiences that they're having here. And having that surfaced, naming it, being able to anchor it and recover it in a city is the biggest challenge. Being out in nature, so much of nature we've destroyed in Oroville. Hopefully they'll preserve their nature, certainly in the gardens they will, but there's been an incredible greening project going on in Oroville over the years, and it's a spectacular version of what's possible in greening a desert.
I guess you felt the difference in the weather in Oroville and Pondicherry when you come in at night, how the cool weather comes in just as you enter Oroville because of the green belt.
Yes, yeah.
When I started the Matrimandia nursery, I used to grow thousands of trees a year in little plastic bags and give them to the green belters.
Oh.
And now some of those trees are 80 feet tall.
How brilliant.
And they take me to see them, and they say the name of this one and the name of that one, which I've long ago forgotten.
Oh.
But they know them so well. Oh. The Greenbelt is a wonderful, wonderful place. You've been there, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, yes, this contact with the earth is extremely important in the integral yoga.
It's so important, and I think that going back to your question of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, Mother, divine energy, earth, they're all the same. They are. We can't live without it. We have to be part of it. And isn't it more beautiful to be part of a wonderful earth than, I come from Australia where the beaches are just pristine and they go for miles. Going to a beach where there's litter in India is a little bit soul-destroying. And I just feel that we have to do better than that.
We must do.
We must do better with the earth in India.
Sri Aurobindo tells us that the earth is the spirit's manifest home.
Yeah.
And one can go into nirvana and escape from all of this. But he says, no, you have to come back, transforming the earth, so there can be a life divine on earth. It's very only one who's ever said that.
That's profound, isn't it?
Tell me a little bit about your storytelling.
Storytelling. So, transformation is the theme, and in all of my stories, there is a transformation that happens, and it's about the diversity of ways that transformation can happen. All of my novels are also about unity consciousness, which is my theme, my big theme. So, for example, my first novel is called The Seduction of Silence, talking about Sri Aurobindo and silence and renunciates. That novel has the two extremes, the seduction and the silence. And it's a pendulum that goes between the two. And it tells 100 years in an Indian family. Because I'm half Indian and half English and Australian by choice. So lots of the stories that roll into family stories in that first novel, The Seduction of Silence. So the second novel is called, and that was a international bestseller. It was in the Hindustani Times as #1 bestseller for months. And then the second novel was called There Where the Pepper Grows. And it's the story of a Polish-Jewish family that come during the war to India. They arrive, first they crossed Russia on the Trans-Siberian Express. They end up in Vladivostok. And then they catch a boat to Japan, and they do this on forged visas that were given out by a fella who was like the Schindler, the Japanese Schindler. And they do this, and they arrive. Somehow they get visas to the promised land, but after much sort of waiting, and they get on a boat called the Asama Maru, and they arrive in Calcutta, and their boat collapses with engine problems, and they land in Calcutta, coming from struggles and strife in Europe during Second World War as Polish Jewish refugees who've experienced the worst of everything. And they arrive in Calcutta and they find a homeland, an unexpected homeland, with prosperity and a community that takes them in. And then after all of that, then they see the fighting starting up again. But instead of Nazis versus Jews versus Poles, it's Muslims versus Hindus. So the theme of separation is only resolved by the central character in his own journey, an understanding of the importance of unity. So it kind of finishes on a prayer for unity. That's very inspired by kind of my understanding of Oroville, my reading, my own utopian ideals. And then, my latest novel is called Elephants with Headlights, and that's really all about the future. What then will this great future bring? Now, I run a lot of futures education and futures thinking methodologies, but I'm very inspired too by the idea of an emergent future and the futures that Sri Aurobindo and the mother were foreseeing. So understanding how to create a better future for the world is the task of that latest novel. So that novel starts with it's called Elephants with Headlights because the driverless car has just come to Delhi, and the entrepreneur who's brought the driverless car to Delhi has to contend with introducing this new piece of technology into a world where the latest law is the elephants have to wear headlights in the streets of New Delhi. So the ancient versus the modern and what we take with us become themes, and that's why it's called Elephants with Headlights.
Wonderful. And in your classes at the university, do you tell these stories?
I tell a lot of stories. I don't always tell my novels. My novels aren't on the reading list because I don't want to privilege myself. Students seek them out if they're interested. I tell many, 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 many stories from my life. I tell stories from the work of others, tell stories from Oroville, tell stories from various traditions. And I think it's very important too in Australia. We live on unceded lands that are Indigenous lands. So the Australian Indigenous people, telling their stories is really important too. And one of the things about their stories is that they're all about unity. They're about relatedness. And those stories help people in Australia, help students understand how they could be more related, connected, collaborative, conscious.
Do you know people in Oroville who are disciples or devotees of Sri Aurobindo?
I mean, they all are to a certain extent. I mean, there are people in Oroville who, everybody is a...
No, I mean in Australia.
In Australia, do I know people?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I know Jan Allen, who's
know
Johnny's
Jan?
partner.
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful.
Oh, I love Jan. Yes, I know Jan. She's probably...
I met her recently.
Oh, she came recently.
Back here,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. I know Jan. And she
and
runs...
then there's Rajiv Ratan, and he has a small group.
Oh, okay. So I know Jan best, and I know her. She's also I met her when I got off the boat in Australia in 1990.
Ah.
Virtually as soon as I arrived. I was raving about Oroville because I'd just been there, and someone said to me, "Oh, you have to meet Jan Allen," and so I promptly met her, and I've known her ever since, and I know her kids, and of course I know Johnny too from Fertile, and I think she's still head of Oroville International in Sydney.
Her son Jonas,
I know,
and my daughter Shally.
Yeah.
Were the closest friends.
Oh, bless.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's lovely. No, I love Jan, and I love her whole family.
I'd like to ask you, Bim, about if you'll share, if you wish to share, about any experiences in the ashram and the chamber of Oroville, the samadhi especially, perhaps.
Wow. This is really personal.
You don't have to.
I will
say.
tell you the story because it's worth having it recorded. So I absolutely adored my father. He's called William LaHunt. But my father left my mother when I was younger, and when I turned 21, he left and he divorced, and he went off to live with another woman. When my father was very sick towards the end of his life, I wasn't really allowed to see him because this other woman didn't really want me around. There are 4 children that my father had. And when he was very sick, I went to see him in hospital in England. Strong intuition, this was going to be the last time I saw him. His wife was saying, no, he's just got a little bit of gastro, don't worry. But he was in hospital, and when I saw him in hospital, I knew that it would be the last visit I made to see him. My father's wife, at one stage, told me to leave the hospital.
Who told you?
My wife, his wife.
His wife.
His wife
Okay.
told me to leave the hospital. She said, I want to spend time with my husband on my own. And I'd cross the country to see him. Don't worry, it gets the ashram. It's a backstory. And 5 months later, my father was sent home. And the day before he died, he rang me up. And he said, I want to tell you that I love you. And I've always loved you. And it was a way of kind of saying the unspoken, really. And then I was so surprised. And he then said, I'm going to die. And I said, I wasn't thinking properly. I said, when are you going to die? Because when are you going to die? It was just like the first question that came out of my head. And he said, tonight's as good a time as any. And I went, wow, okay. And I told him I'd always be devoted to him, and I was so grateful. And we had a lovely conversation. Anyway, he passed away, not that night, but the following day. And he had a funeral that I wasn't invited to. So we had, and I wasn't allowed in his house afterwards where it was taking place. So we had a wonderful man, Ramachandra, who did a funeral for us in Australia. My mother was staying with us at the time, and she'd lost her husband. She's Indian. That was her husband. So we did a funeral with my mother there, my sister, myself, all of his grandchildren. Only one person of his immediate family, like my brother, out of 4 of us, was at his funeral. So we had to do our own thing. And in India, because we sent him off in an Indian way, in India you celebrate the release of the soul 1 year after your father's death, or anybody's death. So that's the tradition. Well, 1 year after my father's death, I was at the ashram, and I went there purposefully that day to say goodbye to my father, I guess. But how do I say it? I mean, you asked the question about psychic being. At that ashram, I get downloads of it. And I had the most incredible, I spent hours there. And that's what I love about the ashram. What I mentioned earlier, the idea of a divine male and a divine feminine. It's like, it was like I had a kind of experience of the perfect family, which my parents weren't perfect together. They had a divorce. So I had the most extraordinary sort of farewell to my father. Yeah. And that was my most, and the first time I ever went to the ashram were my most powerful times there at Samadhi. And then also a powerful connection to Sri Aurobindo through that process as well, which was an incredible experience as part of that story of saying goodbye to my father. Yeah.
Matrimandir Chamber.
Matrimandir Chamber, you want the downloads at Matrimandir Chamber. Oh my goodness, my Matrimandir Chamber. Where to start, really? Because I told the story of the first time I went in there when it was made, and I couldn't walk in there because I'd seen it just as a concrete staircase and meditated at the top of a concrete staircase. And then going in there for the first time, every cell of my body was vibrating. It was like with the air you could feel on your skin, with the place that I was being taken to, with the intense connection to everyone sitting in the room next to me. It was the most extraordinary unity consciousness experience of place that was really profound. But then every day I go there, and it's a practice, and so I can only tell you of Matrimandir, like the latest download I got this morning was just so much about my next steps at my university and what I should do next. And it's just like clear, bell, crystal, like having a conversation with,
the divinity.
Yes, that's right, within. That's how it is. And I think that the place is extraordinary for me. Not everyone has that experience of the place, and that's fine.
Sure.
Some people have a more incredible experience under the banyan tree, which is fine.
Yes.
My students often say, oh, I couldn't get that experience in the chamber, but my goodness, when I went and sat next to the tree, it just all happened. So that's the sort of beyond human unity piece that I feel is very powerful as well. So how to describe that Matrimandir experience? It's the most quiet and blissful meditation. It's a meditation concentration, as it's called, where you can ask questions and get direct answers. It's a place of incredibly. It's a place of such stillness and such bliss and love. That's what I get from the chamber, which is why I go every day. Yeah.
Have you developed an inner seeing?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's part of the practice, and that's part of the journey that you get. But the inner seeing is, I have a sutra that I do every day that's based on that inner light. It's a Patanjali sutra. So I actually do that inner light, inner chamber, to use those words, practice in my meditation every day.
Do some of your students read Mother or Sri Aurobindo?
Yes, they do. They do. And they go, where do I start? And they've gone into bookstores here even going, where do we start? Where's the best one? And so they are not told to read. That's not necessarily, but lots of them do. Like, nobody's there to force them to read. And I think that's the same with the Auroville kids. I've spoken to Auroville kids about their readings and their understandings of the philosophy. And not everyone's a reader, I have to say. And people experience in different ways. So some through hearsay, some through the lived experience of others talking about it, and through modeling. In university, we talk about learning through scaffolding and through modeling. So you create activities and experiences that will help people understand the philosophies of. One thing that the Western university system does is it likes to be so secular that it becomes devoid of color. I think I've used the word anemic before, but that does happen. When in a university where there's meant to be diversity as well as unity, they focus on the diversity alone. They focus on the intellectual ghettos that you can, scuttle down for miles. rather than the unity piece. Yeah.
Yeah. The aspect of reason that Sri Aurobindo says cannot take us very far.
Mm.
In your mind, that you have somewhat silenced, have you approached the higher mind or the illumined or the intuitive mind as yet?
Yeah, I think I have. And you know what? I think a lot of our students have. I think that this generation, they have a word. It's woke. They're all woke. And it's a very interesting contemporary word. But awakened, like how do you awaken to the idea that we're not going to get there the same way that we've been getting there in the past? We have to do things differently. Our generation coming up now are doing things differently.
Oh, it's amazing.
Really amazing.
And the little children, the young children are...
Yeah, I'm so heartened by that. And I think that they do things differently. They're very woke. And I'd say that I'm learning a lot from them about how to do this, because we were all taught to just rely on our minds, and that was going to get us our grades. That, you know, got me a position at Cambridge University, got me my PhD, blah 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 blah. It got me everything that I needed for an academic life, and now I'm a full professor, or, you know, top of the sort of hierarchy of things. But actually, to be a professor who still professes ignorance and unknowing is the best way, like I said, to access that that whole idea of the limited mental capacity. I think that the intuitive capacity, the creative capacity, creativity is really guided by intuition and psychic being, to use the language of Sri Aurobindo. I think that psychic being is the most extraordinary creative guide to the next world. And I see Sri Aurobindo, you know, he was very fortunate to have a 20-plus year literary residency, writing Savitri, writing this extraordinary... His yoga was a literary residency. He experienced the yoga of writing, the union of self through words, through poetry, through kind of just crystallizing it in that beautiful practice. And yeah, it's just... how do you have that direct experience of it yourself so that you can understand what to do or what needs to be done? That's the art of education, contemporary education. Experience it yourself, understand what needs to be done, and then go and do it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we've passed 2 hours.
That was quick.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Namaste all.